Welcome back to America's Vote 2024. I'm Drew Petrimoulx.
And I'm Mychael Schnell. Here at the 9 p.m. hour, this is the list of poll closures across the U.S. And there are a notable few on the list: Arizona, parts of Michigan, Wisconsin, and New York. There's also Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas, Wisconsin, Wyoming. We're getting close to all these polls being closed.
And we have some new Decision Desk HQ projections. Kamala Harris wins New Hampshire. Harris wins Illinois. Harris so far with 67 electoral votes that she has accumulated. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has accumulated 111.
Bob, I want to start by looking at where things stand in Michigan. It's obviously one of these key states in the Democratic blue wall. Kamala Harris is going to need it to win. 10% of the vote is in. Kamala Harris with a 10% lead, but of course, only 10% of the vote in. In 2020, Biden won the state by 2.8 percentage points. A 10-point lead is a good open, but what needs to happen for Kamala Harris in this state for her path to victory?
Well, I mean, if you look at, we're still early, very early, and my friends are texting me, what's going to happen? We don't know what's going to happen. Okay, but Trump is off to a good start. Okay, why? Because Florida was called earlier than I anticipated. Virginia was called, but later than I anticipated, and obviously that went for her. However, there are some good signs for her. You mentioned Michigan, North Carolina. There are some good signs. But overall, it comes down to turnout. And, anecdotally, some of the data suggests maybe there's not the turnout that we thought. And I always thought that Trump was, he's rock solid with his base. But her ceiling is higher than his, and also her floor is lower than his. So that's going to be the determining factor. And right now, again, there are no surprises, but she's got to keep that blue wall. Yeah. I mean, remember, and I know we get all caught up in what's going to happen here, and Florida was called early, which it was. Okay, but it still comes down to Pennsylvania, really. That really is the one state that DDHQ says 85% chance. You win Pennsylvania, you win this thing. But the early data, Trump has an early lead, but it's early in the game.
Yes.
Julie, we were talking a little bit about Michigan. Really interested in what happens in Wayne County in Michigan. That's where Detroit is. Right. That's where Dearborn is. There's not only Detroit, which will be very interested to watch the black vote there, but also it's a high Arab American population in that district, in that county. Something we haven't talked about yet is the impact of that could have on the race. It's looking more and more like Harris is going to have to rely on the blue wall. How do you expect that to play into this election?
Well, look, earlier today, the head of the uncommitted movement said he voted for Harris.
Significant deal.
Big deal, very big deal, particularly for a movement that has been heavily critical of the Biden administration's handling of the war in Gaza, and really a conflict that has turned into a much more regional conflict. And it's not just the Arab vote that she has to be concerned about. You also have white working class voters that have, some sort of swung back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. Biden was able to win them over in 2020, but Trump's really worked hard to win them back, and we've seen a number of, some unions, for example, decide not to endorse, which Trump has sort of taken to be as, a victory for him. So I think there's some skepticism among the white working class vote in some of these blue wall states, particularly Michigan, about her. But the Arab American vote, look, I think the Trump campaign was trying to make inroads there. I don't think they necessarily made major inroads. The question is, could Kamala Harris bring them out to turnout? I haven't seen specific turnout numbers from that community, but if turnout's high from them, that's a good sign.
The Jill Stein vote might be interesting to watch in Michigan.
As well as Wisconsin, because she attracted, I believe, 30,000 votes in 2016. She was not on the ballot. She didn't run in 2020, and Biden won by less than 30,000. Right. So that is one to watch. But it does come down to the blue wall, and we're talking about walls. We always talk about walls in the Trump era. And listen, Trump. Remember, Trump won North Carolina 4 years ago. He won Florida 4 years ago, but he didn't win the blue wall. So that's going to be the key.
And one place where Trump didn't win back in 2020 that he's leading in right now is Georgia. I want to take a look back at Georgia. Right now, Trump has a lead about 5 percentage points right there. Us journalists, not so great at math, about 5 percentage points right there. But with 66% of the vote in. But I want to look at Fulton County because this is where Atlanta is. This is a place where if Kamala Harris wants to win Georgia, just like President Biden did back in 2020, she's going to need to run up the score here. Right now, she's leading Trump there 71.5% to 27.7% with 74% of the vote in. So there's still room for that. But the big question here, Julie, is going to be, can she outweigh Trump's lead elsewhere?
Yeah, outweighs lead elsewhere in the suburbs and also in rural Georgia. Look, we are seeing Trump really run up the score in some of these states with rural voters. That's very important. And, you know, I think we are really seeing the urban-rural divide play out in a number of these states, like in Georgia. I'm curious to see what it looks like in North Carolina. We know that western North Carolina, for example, has been hit hard by some of these hurricanes that could potentially impact turnout if people were able to, you know, have the capacity to go out and vote or vote early. But we are certainly seeing that divide in North Carolina and Georgia, 2 states that I would argue Trump does need.
Mm-hmm.
That rural-urban divide is very interesting because it also, sandwiched in the middle of those is like the exurbs, right? And these are places where Harris is trying to lose by less than she has in the past. And I've been looking at Cherokee County, Forsyth County, Fayette County, all in Georgia, all around the Atlanta metro. And she is improving slightly on Joe Biden in 2020. But the counterbalance to that is how poorly she's doing in the rural areas where you have sometimes, you know, she lost by, 50, 60, 70 points. Those are even being pushed up higher. So, Bob, I just wonder, is that really what's going to make the difference here? Is like how, can she improve her margins in the exurbs and how poorly she loses in those really rural areas?
Well, it's a problem. I mean, going back to the union vote, Biden was actually in polling data with the Teamsters. He polled better than Trump. And then Trump basically won 2-1 against her, even though the Teamsters did not endorse. That shows you that he's really cut into a Democratic stronghold and he's changed. That said, the suburbs have not been kind to Trump, but the rural areas love him. And that's something, I mean, when you look at big picture too, as Julia said, this is very important for Trump to win not only Georgia, but North Carolina, for both of them. And if he does pull off that doubleheader, well, then the chances of him winning are over 80%. If Harris steals one of those states, it's a whole new ballgame. And then the momentum goes to her. So that is something to watch before we go into the blue wall.
And Julia, something I've been interested in that I know you've been tracking this whole cycle is the impact that women's reproductive rights and abortion will have on this race. There's some, we can try to glean some of the trends from what happened in Florida because that amendment ballot initiative question, it failed. It did not reach the 60-vote threshold. 57.4% said they were in support of that. 56.2%. Trump right now has 56.2% support there. So Democrats were banking on the idea that folks who wanted to protect the women's right to choose would then vote Democratic. Doesn't look like that's the case in Florida. There were some splits there.
No, and I'm not surprised there were some splits there. I mean, look, I said this earlier in the show. There is a history in Florida of voters going out and voting for a left-leaning ballot measure and then favoring a right-leaning or a federal candidate like Donald Trump. I think abortion, that issue is obviously very different than raising the minimum wage or medicinal marijuana, but they do have a history of that. I thought it was interesting that we saw that ballot measure fail. You also had recreational marijuana, that ballot measure fail in Florida as well. What that tells me, what's interesting, is that you're seeing, that's sort of I think you saw the senior vote in Florida, obviously a very crucial part of that population, leaning more to the right on that issue. I'm curious to see if we can glean anything from that. We know that voters 65 years and older are some of the most reliable voters. We know that Donald Trump supported that amendment. Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis did not. We know that a number of Republicans tend to lean to the right on that issue. So, I mean, I'm just curious to see if that's glean anything with the 65 vote.
I want to pause the conversation right here because we have some projections from Decision Desk HQ. The state of Louisiana has gone to former President Trump, in addition to South Dakota, North Dakota, and Kansas. Wyoming, Nebraska also in Trump's corner, and New York Vice President Kamala Harris has won that state as well.
Well, thank you, The Hill's Bob Cusack and Julia Manchester. We will see you right back here at 11 o'clock.
All righty.
Guys.
Let's bring in The Hill's national political reporter, Kate Martell. Kate, what are you following tonight?
Hello. What a big night we're having. And you know what I'm following tonight is so far the polls really have been accurate. And every state that we expected to be close, we're seeing incredibly close numbers. Now, we do so far see that former President Trump does look like he is a little bit ahead, but I would argue that most of those states are red-leaning states, states that we fully expected to go in his favor. And, you know, that will likely be matched by Vice President Harris on the other side. So much can still happen. But what we are seeing is how incredibly important these roughly 90 swing state electoral college votes will be, because we have not had any of these major upsets so far.
All right, Kate Martell, thank you so much. We're going to bring it back in Bob and Julia just to go over those election results that we just got. Bob, I'll go to you first. Our home state, New York. No surprise here that it's going to Vice President Kamala Harris, but Donald Trump spent a lot of time in that state. I'm curious to see what the margin was, if he got chipped away at some of the Democratic lead that we typically see there, and B, if that lead was less for Kamala Harris, if Donald Trump did better than expected, will Republican House candidates be able to ride on those coattails?
That's a great question. I mean, Trump has always had a real fantasy of winning New York, his home state. I mean, he just always, the first time I interviewed him in 2015, he mentioned winning New York. And I'm like, New York? And he's like, no, it can happen. So, and he had the MSG rally, as you mentioned.
Sure.
Now, but that's why New York is so important, because not only does Donald Trump want to win the presidency, but he wants the House and the Senate. So he doesn't have to talk to Democrats. They can move things through a complicated process called reconciliation, and that's how he got the Trump tax cuts into law. So those states are not surprises. But to Kate's point, it's a good one too. We have not. There's 7 battlegrounds that we know of. Okay, Virginia. Some people will think, well, maybe Trump, because Trump visited there.
Sure.
Okay, didn't go to Trump. Okay, New Hampshire didn't go to Trump. Okay, so the 7 battlegrounds, we haven't seen them called yet. So.
Right.
You know, everyone needs to take a deep breath.
Yeah. Still a lot of night to go.
Yeah.
One of the interesting, we're talking about the Biden effect on this race and unions and stuff that he plays really well with those in Pennsylvania. In Lackawanna County, that's Scranton. That's, Biden's traditional home base. It's kind of been all over the map. But back in 2020, Biden won that county by +9. Harris is over 10 right in that district right now. So at this point, it's early. Only about half of the precincts reporting right now. But so far, not a drop-off in a place like Scranton that was home to Joe Biden. You'd think that'd be a good sign for the Harris camp.
That is a good sign. It's a good point, Drew. I mean, listen, there are going to be some counties where Biden did better than Harris. But let's be clear. No matter who wins this race, Democrats made the right decision. There is no way Biden was going to win this election. Harris has a chance. She may lose. But I think actually Trump was probably going to win the popular vote as well if Biden stayed in the race. So, but that is interesting. We're getting more data to show, hey, obviously Biden has a different appeal than Harris. They're two different people. But I do think that's interesting that, and remember, we didn't see Biden on the campaign trail a lot. Harris wanted to kind of keep him in the White House, and that's where he's watching results tonight.
Yeah, and Julia, sort of a similar idea that Drew is getting at here. If you look at another, the Philadelphia area, that Kamala Harris is currently leading. She has 86.2% of the vote. Back in 2020, Joe Biden only had 81.4% of the vote. So if it stays like this, she's leading what Biden's numbers were by 5 percentage points. In a state like Pennsylvania, that's her running up the score in a place where she knows she has appeal. And how could that affect who gets Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes?
Look, it could have a huge impact. Obviously, the city of Philadelphia, we know, is going to go to Harris. But the problem Harris was having, and it seems like that problem has maybe lessened itself over the past few days, is the enthusiasm among young black men and young Latino men in particular. There was a reason why when, the weekend of that Madison Square Garden rally, when Trump was in New York City, she was in Philadelphia that day. She was spending lots of time in West Philadelphia with the black community and with the Puerto Puerto Rican community. Ironically, we had that joke made at the Madison Square Garden rally, the very racist joke about Puerto Ricans made in Latinos, which I think benefited Harris, but she needs to run up the score with those voters. I think it's going to get trickier when you move outside of Philadelphia to Bucks County, for example. And also, don't discount Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania. The Trump campaign does feel much better, I think, about the Pittsburgh area, Western Pennsylvania, despite the fact that we've seen some lean Democrat, maybe toss-up congressional seats, sort of move towards Democrats there. The Trump campaign's still feeling very good about that region.
And let's remember also, the first assassination attempt was in Pennsylvania.
Western
So
Pennsylvania,
that fires up the Trump base, and that could be the difference. We don't know, but maybe.
It's early, a lot more votes to count, a lot more to discuss. Guys, thank you so much. We'll check back in with you soon. Now let's head over back to Vice President Kamala Harris's election watch party at Howard University. There you'll find from inside the arena from right outside the arena is Washington correspondent Hannah Brandt. Hannah, give us the state of play right there. What is the energy at that watch party? We've seen some states be called. How are folks feeling?
Hey, Michael, I have heard the states be called as well, and that's because every time a state is called for Harris, these supporters cheer really loud. Of course, they're very excited about that. We've also heard a lot of music. You can probably hear it playing in the background. A lot of Beyonce on that playlist, and that's no surprise. Of course, we know that Beyonce endorsed Vice President Harris, campaigned with her as well, and she's been relying on a lot of star power throughout this campaign. So a lot of those artists making an appearance on this musical list, and that's been really exciting for the people here. A lot of dancing among the supporters in this crowd. Energy is high right now. Of course, we're still waiting for results to roll in, but right now people seem pretty optimistic and energized.
Yeah, and Hannah, we're still waiting for results to come in. It's very early, but one thing we might be able to cross out the list at this point is an absolute Harris landslide, and I wonder if you're picking up any of that energy, realization that maybe they're in for a longer night than maybe some of them hoped that they could be out of there before midnight.
Sure, I don't think so, and I think really the Harris campaign has been kind of setting the stage that this is going to be close. I mean, she's been saying that all along, and people have been listening. I think the supporters here know that. Supporters across the country understand that this race has always been expected to be close, so I don't know that anyone really thought, okay, we're going to know one way or the other immediately after the polls closed, and these students, they do seem energized, not just students, but supporters in general. They do seem energized, excited to be here. And I imagine it'll stay that way for the next couple of hours. They're especially excited to see the Vice President herself come here to the watch party. So that'll certainly coincide with an uptick in energy, I'd imagine.
Yeah, Hannah, that was actually exactly what I wanted to ask you. Any more updates on when we will see Harris tonight?
We haven't heard yet a definitive time from the campaign. We know that Vice President Harris had planned to have dinner at home with her family. I know I mentioned earlier that she's actually hosting family at her home as well. So spending some good family time as she, I imagine, is glued to her phone like the rest of us, watching the results roll in.
All right, Hannah Brandt, thank you so much. We'll check back in with you later tonight. And for now, we'll be right back with more America's Vote 2024. To the Hill special election coverage, America's Vote 2024. And we'll start off with a key race projection. Decision Desk HQ says Trump has won the state of Missouri and its 10 electoral college votes. As we get more race calls, as we get more numbers, we're going to head into some analysis now. And back with us at the table is the Hill's White House reporter, Brett Samuels. Brett, another state in former President Trump's corner. What are you hearing from Trump advisors at this point? How is the campaign feeling?
Yeah, I think the Trump campaign feels pretty good about where they stand right now. When you look at states like Georgia, Kamala Harris seemed to have this sort of very early initial lead. Trump has overtaken her there. North Carolina, still too soon to say who's won that state, but there's some evidence that Trump is increasing his margins in rural counties in particular from where he stood in 2020. And if you look at some of these other states, as Pennsylvania results come in, you look at some of these other battleground states, if Trump is able to run up those rural margins, then that puts more pressure pressure on Vice President Harris and her campaign to sort of outrun him in the suburbs, basically. So overall, I think a pretty good, if not overwhelmingly confident feeling from the Trump campaign.
Yeah, one of the things I was just talking about is that one of the scenarios that maybe we can cross off the list of possible outcomes tonight is a Harris landslide. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. If Harris does win this race, it's probably going to come in the blue wall. What is the message being projected from Harris headquarters at this moment?
Yeah, the message from Harris campaign, from Democrats, is essentially it's too early to panic, that people shouldn't be seeing these results in Georgia. The New York Times needle, of course, as it fluctuates back and forth, that people shouldn't lose their wits about them and think that this race is over by any means. Certainly, you go to a state like Pennsylvania, traditionally takes a long time for them to count ballots. We saw in 2020 sort of the ebb and flow where, Biden was off to an early lead, then Trump overtook him, then in the end, Biden won the state. So Harris campaign folks are still sort of projecting that sort of, everyone take a deep breath. This is going to be a long night. Polls haven't even closed yet in Nevada and Arizona, two key battleground states. So the Harris campaign is basically, in this for the long haul, and they're not sweating quite just yet because, as you said, Drew, the blue wall is sort of where she has her path to victory.
Does it feel at all similar to like 2020, where there was that blue mirage? So at first, former President Trump came out with the commanding lead. He ended up declaring victory later in the night. And then over the next few days, Kamala Harris chipped away at that lead and then eventually overtook it. Are Democrats and the Harris campaign, as you see it, sort of saying, stay the course, because look what happened in 2020, it could happen again this time?
Yeah, I think, on the one hand, that's definitely, I think people are saying that. They're saying, let's not overreact to these initial ballot returns, especially in Pennsylvania, like I mentioned. That's a state that notoriously kind of ebbs and flows as more results come in. Philadelphia and the counties around there sort of famously come in as sort of the last batch of votes. So that could certainly play a role in a late surge for Harris. But on the other hand, I think, yes, there is this idea of a red mirage that Republicans are going to do well early, and then we'll see how the results fluctuate as more early ballots and such are counted. But the difference this time is Republicans really invested a lot in having voters cast their ballot early. They encourage folks to cast mail ballots, vote early in person.
A departure from what happened in 2020, notably.
Absolutely, yeah, where Trump notoriously railed against early voting, spread these claims about fraud. And while Trump himself still at times expressed skepticism about early voting, we've seen Republicans do a much better job of encouraging their voters to cast their ballots early. So the question is whether that cannibalizes their election day vote or whether that, prevents this sort of red mirage we're seeing, and maybe Republicans hold on to that leads that they may have in some of these states.
All right, Brett, stick with us 1 second. We want to check in with down in West Palm Beach with Rashad Hudson. He is at the headquarters, the election party of former President Trump. Rashad, we've been talking about the returns that have come in so far, and it's still early, but there's, I assume, some good feelings going on down there at that watch party.
Yeah, hey, good evening to you. It's a lot more people here than the last time I talked to you. It's not quite a packed out room just yet, but they're expecting more people to file into this room. Now, the supporters that are in the room, they're pretty locked in on the monitors behind me because they're able to watch the results come in real time. And when they're announcing these races for former President Trump, the crowd is cheering loudly. They're excited. Many of them tell me they're from all over the country. They traveled from all over to be here to watch the results come in with the former president. Now, as for former President Trump, he's back at Mar-a-Lago with his family and top advisors, watching the results, crunching the numbers, looking at all of the data points that has gotten him to this point. They're trying to see where they are right now when it comes to trying to win this election.
And Rashad, any updates yet on when we're going to see the former president tonight? I know that you're at his Mar-a-Lago residence right now. Any update on when we can actually see or hear from him?
Yeah, we're expected at some point to see former President Trump. We're still not sure exactly when that will be. His team and the former president, they're waiting on more numbers to come in. They're waiting to feel confident to be able to come out. So they're watching this like many Americans at home.
Talking about that party that you're out, who's actually in the crowd there? Are these just supporters of the former president? Are they donors? Do you see any politicians around? Who are the people that we see there? We see some people taking pictures.
Yeah, a lot of the people that are in this room are key Trump supporters. Many of them are campaign workers as well. And I will tell you, before they enter the room, there's a table set up where they can pick up for free a Trump hat and a Trump t-shirt. The campaign's giving out free campaign merch to those early bird supporters as a way to draw people in, to make them more excited, and to just have what they're hoping, a packed out crowd here at the West Palm Beach Convention Center.
All right, Rashad Hudson, thank you so much. We're back here now with Brett Samuels, but first, a Decision Desk HQ projection. And it's a fairly big one. The state of North Carolina has been won by former President Trump. Brett, reaction right up the top. North Carolina, Harris folks were hopeful they could maybe capture it, which would be an astonishing thing, something that hasn't happened in years. Trump, though, keeping it in his column.
Yeah, very similar, I think, to 2020, where we saw the Biden campaign then sort of maybe be a little optimistic about flipping North Carolina. In the end, Trump won by this very tight margin of about a percentage point or two. Looks to be on a similar track here with Trump and Harris. And essentially this, I think, essentially for Harris, all of the marbles are now in the blue wall for her. She has to sweep Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. That's her path to 270 votes. Of course, Nevada and Arizona are still out there, but those states and their electoral votes don't compensate if she were to lose Pennsylvania, if she were to lose Michigan. It wouldn't be enough to get her off the finish line. So, Georgia appears to be trending Trump's way. North Carolina, obviously, we have this call for Trump, sort of takes those off the table for Harris, and now all eyes turn to the blue wall.
We're getting a fuller picture of what's going on.
All right, Brett Samuels, thanks so much for joining us. Let's bring in the Hill's staff writer, Rafael Bernal. Rafael, what have you seen, if anything, in the exit polling, the numbers of Latino voters? Any big takeaways?
The big takeaway is different behaviors in Florida and Pennsylvania. You do see county. You mentioned Osceola County last time I was on in Florida. The Puerto Rican voters there did not fall for Harris like they did 4 years ago for President Biden. And now Harris really needs that turnout, that Puerto Rican turnout in Pennsylvania, to be very aggressively pro-Harris. That's what's expected, but we're seeing these very tight margins everywhere. We're seeing North Carolina is not what Democrats wanted, and Central Florida was not what Democrats wanted.
And Rafael, what can you glean from these results so far, the reaction, the outfall, if anything, to those remarks that were made at the former president's Madison Square Garden rally about Puerto Rico by that comedian?
Well, it's still a matter of turnout. So it probably got more people voting in Pennsylvania. It did, but it did not do that in Florida. That's what we know.
Yeah, it's interesting. We all know that no group is a monolith, but it is very interesting that you're getting a different reaction to both campaigns in a place like Florida, and maybe the reaction is different among the same demographic of voters in a place like Pennsylvania. Any idea why that is?
Well, I mean, that's right. No group is a monolith. Florida is a very different sort of campaign scenario than Pennsylvania. Democrats campaigned more in Pennsylvania. The comments were made closer to Pennsylvania, and sort of the focus has been on that group of Latinos. There are also more rural Latinos along the Latino corridor, Allentown, Reading, and so on. So there's really it's really an urban-rural difference. It's just when they arrived in the United States, and yeah, it really solidifies that fact that Latino voters, you have to go after them. If you don't go after them, you lose them essentially, as Democrats seem to have done in Osceola County in Florida.
Fascinating dynamics tonight, Rafael. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be right back here with Nexstar's national live stream host, Chip Brewster, and founder and editor of Pluribus News, Reed Wilson, with the latest updates from the state and local level. Don't go anywhere.
Back, everybody, to America's Vote 2024 as we continue to watch the results roll in. And in fact, we have another Decision Desk HQ projected winner. There's that sweet stinger I was waiting for. So Colorado going for Harris and Reid. This is one of those no surprise situations.
Yeah,
here.
Colorado was a swing state back in the George W. Bush days. It's not a swing state anymore. Solidly in the Democratic column. If Harris had any trouble in Colorado, we might have had a close night.
Yeah,
might have a short night.
Much shorter. There would have been a lot of other things to analyze, but at this point, it's all kind of going to the polls that they have projected it, and so it's still coming down to the swing states. And we want to start with our deep dive analysis with Pennsylvania.
Yep. Let's take a look at Pennsylvania here. And as we take a look, we mentioned earlier the 4 collar counties there: Montgomery, Bucks, Chester, and Delaware.
Yeah.
Again, these were counties that were the quintessential swing counties in America when George W. Bush was running for re-election in 2004. They are no longer the sort of swing counties. They're firmly in the Democratic camp. Joe Biden won those counties by a combined 293,000 votes in 2020, en route to winning the state by 82,000 votes. Good news for Vice President Harris. So far, with only 20% of the vote in, she's up by about 105,000 votes in those counties. Again, 80% left to count, plenty to go. Add in Philadelphia, where Vice President Harris is doing better than President Biden did, taking 83% of the vote in the city versus 81% for Biden. Still a lot of time to count there, but that's notable. Those are, Harris needs a huge turnout in Philadelphia, and it looks like she's getting it.
And let's break down just a bit further what it is that you're telling us, because it's one thing to say, here's the numbers, here's what she needs to win, but what you're doing is taking that a step further and saying, all right, Biden carried this in 2020, carried the state by how much? Okay, now I'm looking at the county, I'm looking at the percent vote, I'm looking at the lead difference there.
Right.
So why is it that you are able to arrive at the analysis you are right now?
So what we're seeing here is Democrats running up the score in big urban counties and even in the suburban counties like those collar counties we just talked about, and Republicans running up the score in more rural areas. Brett was talking about that a few minutes ago over in the other room over there, and that's what we're seeing. I mean, Trump is doing better in what people sort of pejoratively call the T. I mean, the rest of Pennsylvania outside of that sort of Philly area and Philly exurbs and Pittsburgh and up into Erie. So those typically Republican areas are turning out at big numbers. The urban areas that are Democratic vote bastions, they're turning out at bigger numbers too. One of the good things in this super divided age of partisan politics, we're in a golden age of voter turnout, and I think that's something to be celebrated. More people are showing up to vote. Good. That's great.
You know, I'll take that positive spin on people being fired up because of the negative that politics is trying to put in there when they're out there campaigning, saying, hey, you got to come out and vote for me to beat the other guy. Right. But I like it. Higher voter turnout, more engagement by the electorate.
Let me point out one more thing that I'm seeing in a lot of the exit polls. The gender gap. This was supposed to be the election with the largest gender gap in American history. Women favor Vice President Harris by a huge margin. Men favor former President Trump by a huge margin. I'm not seeing a massive gap here. Yes, it's big, but in Pennsylvania, Trump is ahead among men by 14 points. Harris is winning women by 12 points. Okay. In Michigan, Trump up 11 among men, Harris up 8 among women. In Wisconsin, men favor Trump by 9, women favor Harris by 11. So those gender gaps, they're not the massive outstanding thing we've seen, and I think that's a part of the reason why the team over there in the other room said correctly that the scenario of Harris running away in a landslide is sort of off the table right now. That gender gap that she would have needed, that explosive growth among women, it's just not showing up right now.
Can we talk about Georgia before we move on to the Senate seats? I know that is another thing we want to focus on, but Georgia being that, it's in the southern stronghold, but it's still going to be a contender at this point.
It is, and there's still votes to come out of Fulton, out of Cobb, out of DeKalb County, those counties around Atlanta. But it looks like most of the Republican counties are pretty much in.
Yeah, I've pulled up. So for those that don't know, this map, it's pretty cool. It has a few different functions. So this is the ballots counted. This is what we've been showing the most. But then we have a uncounted votes. And so you can get a sense of what votes are yet to come in. And to your point, just looking at the size of the circles, thanks visualization, it is those more liberal-leaning counties that have yet to put in the most votes at this point.
So let's do some math here. Approximately 4 million votes cast. President Trump, former President Trump, had 2.1 1.1 million, Vice President Harris 1.9 million, so a gap of about 200,000 votes there with about a quarter left to come in. So here we can see Gwinnett County, a substantial number of votes left to count there in a heavily Harris district. Fulton County, still, a quarter of the votes.
Counted, but 25% of a very dense county is a lot of votes in just raw numbers.
And that 25% of the vote could be effectively half of the vice president's deficit right now. We look at Cobb County, still about a quarter of the votes left to count there. And then down here in liberal Savannah and Chatham County, a lot of votes left to count. That's going to be a Harris County by a substantial margin there too. So the vote centers where ballots are left to be counted in Georgia, they favor Democrats. Do they favor Democrats enough that Vice President Harris can net the 200,000 votes that she needs to catch up with former President Trump? Right now, it doesn't look like she has them, but there are still votes to come, so we'll see.
And this is one of those, because there are multiple at this point where you won't have that early projection because it's so close that you need to wait till truly a vast majority of the votes have come in to establish, yes, this person is going to win that state and those electoral college votes. Now, let me pivot to Senate races because, yes, we talk about presidents, but the control of the Senate, the control of the House, that has a big part in the next administration, whoever is sitting in the Oval Office. And so you've been taking a look at that as well.
Yeah, and it looks like so far Democrats are running a little bit ahead of Vice President Harris in a lot of the key Senate battleground races, but not massively so. And I think this is to be expected. The phenomenon of split ticket voting was once super common in America, no longer so much. But looking at Pennsylvania, Senator Bob Casey running about a point ahead of Vice President Harris. Looking at Ohio, Senator Sherrod Brown about 2 points ahead of Harris. Virginia, Senator Tim Kaine about 3 points. And then in Texas, U.S. Representative Colin Allred running about 2 points ahead of Harris. Those are slim margins, and that should probably be of concern to somebody like a Senator Sherrod Brown in Ohio, pretty Republican state. Former President Trump is going to carry that state, and Sherrod Brown needs a substantial number of crossover voters to survive there. We'll see if he can get them. Good news for Casey, running 1 point ahead of Harris in what's going to be the closest state in America. And then we take a look at a place like Virginia, where it's not a surprise that Tim Kaine is going to win re-election there, and Vice President Harris is probably going to carry that state as well. So all in all, as I look at this landscape of Senate races, Senate Democrats are doing better than Vice President Harris, but not mammothly so. And when it comes to a red state like Ohio, and later in the night, a very red state like Montana, where Senator John Tester is seeking re-election, that's not good news.
That will be an interesting one to watch. I mean, and that is where it may not even be a split ticket, but it may be just the individual that is making that difference because he has a different kind of appeal other than just being a Democrat in a very red state.
I mean, Sherrod Brown has won a lot of elections in Ohio as Secretary of State, as the U.S. Senator. So not a surprise that he's built his own brand. You can still do that in American politics as a U.S. Senator. Harder to do it as a representative or a state legislator. I mean, heaven help you if you're a state legislator. If you're in a wave here, you're getting swept out. I mean, no matter what.
Yes, I do not disagree with you there. I want to focus in on the Texas race, though, because Ted Cruz, that is a known name. He is a very vocal senator. He has been a main Trump supporter. There's some controversy behind him. Even in Texas, I think a lot of people talk about his trip to Cancun when the big freeze happened in Texas, and he was out on vacation, essentially, rather than dealing with a almost statewide impact. So let me bring up the map there, because Texas has already been called for Donald Trump. And so those votes are still coming in, as we can see, even though we're at 64% of votes counted, they've already declared for Donald Trump. Now, he's got, of counted, 55 to Harris's 43. But when we roll down to that Senate race, it's just shy of 53 to Allred's 45. And so there is a 2-point difference from the top of the ticket to the Senate ticket here, and clearly has not been called for Cruz yet.
Let me tell you, I have some friends in Texas, and they were telling me that there were a lot of Halloween costumes of Ted Cruz pulling a suitcase through an airport.
That is the photo that is iconic with that situation.
That was a big thing. And Ted Cruz is not as popular in Texas, even among Republicans, as somebody like a Governor Greg Abbott or a Senator John Cornyn, the senior senator from Texas. You know, Ted Cruz grates on people. That's I think that's the safest way to put it. And in this case, he's substantially ahead of Colin Allred, with still 40% of the vote to come. Nobody, the Associated Press or nobody else has called this race.
No, but that reminds me. I did also want to look at, as we were doing with the other states, uncounted votes at this point. Where are they coming from? And it's hard to not discount the fact that the density of those population centers have bigger bubbles. But
and don't forget, Texas has 254 counties, so a lot of those small ones. Like I'm looking at Sterling County has not reported any votes, and let's see, there's a county up here in the north
it takes
part.
forever for me to scroll down to S. Thank you for saying S on Sterling.
There are 200.
No, I'm almost there now. Now you can't give up on Sterling. There's Sterling County.
There we go. No votes reported, but so there are all these small counties. The biggest votes left to come in are in the Dallas Metroplex, Austin, San Antonio, Houston. No surprise, the sort of the triangle that represents 75 or 80% of Texas's population. But we'll see how that goes. Two counties I always keep an eye on in these situations.
In Texas?
In Texas are Collin County and Denton County, just north of the Dallas Metroplex, right up there. There you go. Collin County and
83% in. Ted Cruz has 52 to 45. That's actually tracking with the closer to the statewide as we're looking.
Right, and you go just to the west there, and you'll get to Denton County.
Denton, there you go. 54-44. So he's got a slightly better in Denton County.
Now let's consider what happened in Denton and Collin County from 2016 to 2020.
Okay.
In 2016, Hillary Clinton lost Collin and Denton County by about 20 points. In 2020, Joe Biden lost those two counties by 8 percentage points in Denton County and 4 percentage points in Collin County. These are two of the fastest growing counties in America. And I've done a lot of reporting out there. I talked to mayors and city council members and state senators and stuff. They literally can't build schools fast enough to accommodate the thousands of new kids who are coming in. And you talk to Republican officials in Texas, and they say, "Boy, we love attracting all these Californians. They move here." Then you turn off the tape recorder, and they say, "Boy, we wish they'd stop voting like they lived in California." And we're seeing that in places like Collin County and Denton County. If Texas is ever truly going to be in play for Democrats, those suburban counties in the Dallas Metroplex are going to start to flip. We haven't seen a full flip yet, so Cruz ahead by 7 points in Collin, 10 points in Denton. Looks like a little reversion to a pre-2020 era, but still, I'm watching those counties like a hawk. You can tell they went from 20 points in 2016 to less than 10 points in 2020. Over the long run, these are the growth areas of Texas.
All right, and then,
you know what? Actually, I shouldn't say that. Every area of Texas is a growth area of Texas.
Oh, yeah. And then I was hearing a note. I missed the state, but there's a request to look at one more Senate race. Oh. Well, what is it going to be so I can tease ahead to it? You're seeing just one part of the conversation. Maryland. Okay. When you guys come back to us, we're going to talk about the Senate race taking place in Maryland, and so stay tuned. Lots more to come. We're only about halfway through this scheduled live stream and probably not even close to halfway through the election night itself. We'll be back.
Welcome back to The Hill's live election night coverage. I'm Robbie Suave, host of Rising, and we are starting to get some tangible information, Miki, that might portend what direction the night is headed. So the state of North Carolina, a pivotal swing state, has been called, not by everyone, but by Decision Desk HQ, which is partnered with The Hill, has been called for Donald Trump. The New York Times has not called it, but now gives Trump, says it's likely Trump will win it. Also that it's likely Trump will win Georgia. He's up there +5. These are not must-win states necessarily for Harris, but what I would say is that the avenues for Harris to have some creative way to still win if things go wrong in the blue wall states, that's going to become a dead end for her. She is getting to the place where she's going to have to hold Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin in order to be elected president. The kind of creative solutions, but what if she could lose Pennsylvania but win this other combination of states? I'm calling it right now. That's not going to happen. She has to win Pennsylvania to win this election.
And I think that's what they've always figured, is that she had to win Pennsylvania. And also, they were hopeful about North Carolina. I'm still hopeful about North Carolina. We have.
You think, but it's been called. Well,
there's some other stuff that
Decision Desk HQ is going to have egg on their face tomorrow morning.
But all I'm saying is we have to keep in mind that they haven't started counting. North Carolina usually counts very quickly, as the New York Times says, but early voting for the first year ever, early voting did not start to be counted until the polls closed. And in other states, Georgia's got a similar issue where they have to deal with overseas ballots, provisional ballots, and it's really tight right now. You have the same in Virginia. Virginia, many results may be reported by noon on Wednesday. Because they don't start counting the mail-in votes, it can be as far as 3 days out. So when you have the margins this small, it could come down to provisional ballots, overseas ballots, mail-in ballots. And in the case of North Carolina, I also think it's going to come down to Asheville, which is a very progressive, specifically progressive, like Democratic-leaning city that was hit so hard by the hurricane. And there's been concern over how many folks are going to be able to turn out to those polls and if that hurricane will affect the election. This is that kind of year, though. This is a year where micro communities, we were learning so much about geography and different communities within larger communities, they could determine the election. Puerto Ricans in Pennsylvania, Asheville, North Carolina.
You bring up Virginia, where it is a very tight race still, and there's some hope and some reason to believe that in these counties that are right now leaning Trump in a very encouraging way for Republicans, that there's still ballots to come in that might tip things a little bit back toward Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris ahead in these counties, but not ahead by as much as Biden has been ahead by. And Virginia has been a state that surprised us in recent memory. I said when we were talking earlier, the Glenn Youngkin win there, doing actually well in the suburbs. A lot of frustration with Democratic policies relating to COVID and schools and everything. So if Trump were to somehow take Virginia from Kamala Harris and she hasn't made a pickup in she hasn't picked up North Carolina and she hasn't held on to Georgia, it's actually over. But she could win Virginia. She's still there's still a little bit. She's ahead there right now. New York Times has it as likely Democrat, even though Trump is ahead right now. So I think after this point, the map is going to show. We're going to see what happens on the West Coast, Arizona, Nevada, the Sun Belt states rather, closer toward in the direction of the West Coast, as you said. We're talking about geography here, and then we're going to return to the Midwest for the ultimate showdown.
Your land. I gotta say, folks are really upset online about the Colin Allred, Ted Cruz race in Texas. It was really coming close, and Ted Cruz pulled it off. Surprise! Even without Mitch McConnell's help, anxiety. I mean, there's anxiety all around. That's one thing. We were looking on Twitter. We're looking for some interesting stuff to discuss, and it was kind of boring.
Yeah, what I'm picking up on, I'm sensing mounting Democratic nervousness that. And mounting Republican overconfidence, which could be quickly reversed as it was last time when, we talked about the red mirage, when some of these early returns look favorable to conservatives, and then later you count the other stuff that is disproportionately Democrat, and you have things start to shift back the other way. Maybe Republicans are preparing themselves for that. Maybe Democrats are preparing for themselves for that. Who knows? Yes, you mentioned the Ted Cruz win in Texas. The GOP did get some disappointment in Maryland with Larry Hogan, a very moderate Republican, not warmly embraced by or embracing of Donald Trump, losing there to Angela Alsobrooks. So that will not be a Republican win. However, looking very closely at the Ohio Senate race, Bernie Moreno doing well there so far. A lot of the votes still to count, but that is looking like a very possible pickup, I think, for Republicans as well, and a difficult state that is increasingly red against Sherrod Brown, the incumbent.
I mean, it's a shame because Sherrod Brown has been such a great progressive working, fighter for working people.
Yeah, there was a period where he had pulled off the difficulty of being in a red state, but being someone who has credibility with union people, with working class people on sort of populist issues, labor issues, economic issues, while still being a Democrat and still associated with administration and a president and a policy that is increasingly culturally or vibes-based unpopular. I use the word vibes way too much in the last several days, weeks, episodes of the show.
Momentum.
I'm going to start retiring that word.
Thesaurus.
Yeah, banning myself from saying it. But it has swam upstream or against the tide with how things are shifting in terms of the labor vote and the working class vote moving into the Republican column. I don't think it's going to be enough to overcome the challenge.
I sadly think you're correct. I think it's been that way. I mean, if you remember, he opted out of even going to the Democratic National Convention because he didn't want to lose a few days of campaigning. That's how tight it has been in Ohio. It's the demographics have shifted quite a bit. I also think, once again, no matter what happens, the Democrats are going to have an inflection point and this is the drum that I've beaten for the last 10 years. I will not give up on it. The Democrats need to have party operations in every single state, because when you're not on the ground, you're basically, not doing it 24/7, you're basically giving the ground to Republicans, and they're winning the messaging wars. And especially in a race like this, where Kamala Harris only had 3 months to introduce herself to many voters, to talk about the issues that people care about, when Donald Trump has had 9 years to do this, and he has been doing it for 9 years. So Democrats, I gotta say, no matter what happens, we have to change our strategy. We have to start thinking about every single neighborhood, every single community, every single small race as an opportunity to talk about our messaging, what we care about. Because whether it was the legislatures being lost during the Obama years, or the Trump MAGA movement building from the ground up all across this country in lands that used to be more democratic, like the Rust Belt, we have to learn our lessons. And that might even mean shaking it up with some of the staff that's been running things for the last few years.
Indeed. A lot of the staff running Democratic campaigns, if we go back to the Hillary Clinton loss, just some terrible shooting yourselves in the foot. Too much advice from elite young progressives, I think.
I wouldn't even say they're progressives.
Not progressive on the parts of progressivism that are popular, that I don't necessarily agree with, but I am willing to admit poll well, minimum wage, expanding Medicare, that kind of stuff. Again, not my policies, but I understand they poll well. What doesn't poll well is like using the pronoun Latinx, or that kind of microaggressions, or that kind of thing, and that's what the consultant type people Democrats rely on, tell them to do. So we'll see if Democrats have to do soul searching tomorrow morning. Maybe not. We might not know by then, but we'll find out. The Hill's election night coverage continues. Stay with us.